LittleBigPlanet, or LBP, is a series of games that I fell in love with over 10 years ago. And after so many years, it's become an important part of my channel and even an important part of my life. At its core, LBP was just a floaty puzzle platformer, but the defining factor of these games, the feature that made it stand out, was user-generated content. Play, create, and share was LBP's iconic tagline ever since the very first game on PS3. And over time, talented creators in the community managed to use the in-game tools available to make some amazing stuff. Of course, you had your 2D platforming levels, but by the second game, people were making films, music, costumes, and eventually levels that went beyond the platformer genre. And even today, people are still creating, playing, and sharing with no signs of slowing down. I've already talked about the entire LittleBigPlanet trilogy on my channel. I've gone through the progression of each game by discussing the new mechanics and ideas each new entry offered. I even shared my memories of playing with friends, memories of exploring the endless sea of community-made content, and last but not least, mentioned how much I adored the fantastically crafted story mode levels in each of the games. But ever since LittleBigPlanet 3 launched in 2014, we never saw another mainline entry. So today, instead of going forward, we're going to go back. Back to the past. Okay, not that far back, but back to the game that was my introduction to the LBP series, LittleBigPlanet for the PSP. Yeah, this was my first LBP game. In fact, besides Family Guy The Frickin' Sweet Collection, which wasn't even a game, mind you, LittleBigPlanet was the only PSP game I ever had up until, well, recently. But this bite-sized adventure combined with my white Darth Vader PSP at the time brought my 9-year-old self so many months of enjoyment. Although LittleBigPlanet for the PSP was considered somewhat of a spin-off or watered-down counterpart to the first game in the series, it actually released a year after, on November 17th, 2009. This version was mainly developed by a team formerly known as Studio Cambridge, which went on to become Gorilla Cambridge, which then went on to dissolve and shut down in 2017. But Cambridge was tasked with creating an entirely new LittleBigPlanet game for Sony's PlayStation Portable system. The original creators of the first game, Media Molecule, or MM for short, actually had some part in developing LBP PSP in tandem with Cambridge, but to what extent I have no clue. Digging up the development for this specific game has not been an easy task. But Cambridge was a studio that already had a history of making games for PlayStation platforms, with the Medieval series on PS1 and PSP, and their last game before shutting down, Riggs Mechanized Combat League for PSVR. And for a team like them to take a crack at LittleBigPlanet, this relatively new franchise at the time, impressed me, because they did a pretty damn good job. I'm honestly shocked by how well they nailed the feel of LittleBigPlanet. It had both a well-made story mode and a very limited but still somewhat bearable create mode. You can say this PSP game was just a mere spin-off, a simplified counterpart to the PS3 game, but the game played as if it was a mainline entry. In fact, the story itself was a direct sequel to the first game, and every single level in story mode was completely new with unique characters, unlockables, and environments. The story itself was nothing notable. Sackboy goes on a vacation after the events of the first game, which ends up turning into a quest to gather a group of people called the Creator Curators, so they can all meet at a carnival at the end of the game. Again, nothing too crazy. Just like LBP1 though, this game had you exploring levels that were based off of real-life locations, such as Egypt, Iran, Hollywood, and much more. The characters themselves were also styled after the first game's characters, much like everything else in this game. They are simply cardboard cutouts. Sure, it's not a step up like the Sackbots in LBP2, but it's still fine. I mean, the simplicity of the characters fit the tone and style of early LittleBigPlanet, and they're just as likable. As for the story mode levels, Studio Cambridge made sure every single one was a blast to play through. And just like LBP1, as well as other games in the series, this version had a very fitting feel-good music tracks to play along to. I would love to share some of the music in this video, but due to copyright issues, I can't really do that. Just go do yourself a favor after this video and look up Glockenpop by Spiderbait and tell me it doesn't just scream LittleBigPlanet to you. Tell me it doesn't sound nostalgic even if you didn't play this game before. That's just how good the music is. Now that I think about it, I never really gave a lot of credit to the soundtracks in these games, but whether it's the licensed music they use from independent musicians or the music specifically made for LBP, they always perfectly capture the atmosphere of LittleBigPlanet. No matter the game, no matter the developer, every music track that's picked always fits and sounds amazing. And the PSP game is no exception.
Oh, it's a tight one in here. Star Wars Battlefront Renegade Squadron, I like that. White Darth Vader PSP, nice unit. Collectible, that's great.
Customize your weapons better you can.
Dude, get your own Star Wars Battlefront Entertainment Pack.
PSP.
This version of the game is also infamous for the lovable Sack Nana costume. Yeah, the banana Sackboy meme originates from the PSP game. This banana costume is part of the Fruit Salad DLC pack, and it saddens me to say that I couldn't download it on my PS Vita, the system I'm using to play this game on, the system I'm using to capture footage. But yeah, for whatever reason, it seems like DLC for PSP games just aren't compatible with the Vita? I guess, I don't really know. But if you have a PSP, there are quite a few DLC costumes you can pick up for completely free. All of which, by the way, are unique to this version. Yeah, it seems like every single DLC costume and even most of the base game costumes were made only for the PSP version, and I'm surprised none of them ever came to mainline games, not even through DLC. That means Sack Nana is forever stuck on the PSP, and unless we get a banana Sackboy costume in the new adventure game for PS5, he will only remain a distant memory. Now this game is definitely not the best in the series, not even close. For one, mechanics from the first game had to be simplified or just straight out cut. This was obviously due to the PSP being a lot weaker than the PS3, and it's to be expected. For example, the 3 playable layers from LBP1 was slimmed down to just 2 playable layers, and it worked fine. Cambridge made sure the story mode levels were built around these limitations. They were still fun as heck to play through, and that's really all that matters. And I honestly applaud them for what they accomplished. Another cut mechanic was multiplayer. Yeah, multiplayer wasn't in the PSP version, and again, I understand why, but it still sucks. The multiplayer was a big factor as to why I loved this series, but it not being here is understandable. There were still, however, community levels. Yes, thankfully, in the PSP version you were still able to create levels and publish them. At least, you used to be able to. Unfortunately, the LBP PSP server shut down in 2016, which sucks, for me especially, because I never experienced this firsthand. When I had a PSP back in 2010, I guess I didn't know how to connect it to the internet, which led me to not knowing about this feature's existence for a long time. However, I did hear that there weren't really a whole lot of great levels to play by other people, mainly because the creation mode that I brought up before severely restricts the amount you can do with it. Sure, it had some new additions, such as a static object type, which would later be used in future games. And hey, Sackboy was given multiple new animations to express himself with. Honestly, there wasn't a lot of new content. This game took away more than it added, and there were some very huge omissions that make level creation a hassle to even do. You can't scale objects anymore, so you can't make them bigger or smaller. There are no global settings, so water doesn't exist. Paintinators aren't in the game. You can't put stickers on Sackboy, there is no customizable grid, and most importantly, dynamically shaping objects is one of the least intuitive things ever, and brings down the entire creation mode for me. Despite all of this, I think Cambridge did a decent enough job translating most of the PS3 tools to the PSP version. And you have to remember, this game is running on a handheld in 2009. There's not a whole lot you can do when the hardware itself was so limited, but they still managed to cram in as many options as they could. Ultimately though, this was a pretty solid attempt at a LittleBigPlanet game. Nothing crazy, mind you. It was on the PSP for crying out loud. It was never going to be as grand and robust as its PS3 counterpart, but I liked it for what it was. And it's still worth playing today, only if it's just for those story mode levels. It was definitely nostalgic going back to this game for the video, but I still had more fond memories and more fun playing LBP1 and LBP2. Nothing can top those.
LittleBigPlanet is now available on PSP and new PSP Go, which means you can play, create, and share your Super Sackboy adventures wherever you are. Your adventures, your ideas, your community. Your whole world in your hands.
After covering LittleBigPlanet for the PSP last year, you'd think the next logical step is to talk about the Vita game, right? Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves, because if you remember, there was something else released between PSP and PS Vita, a shorter adventure that some fans might consider primitive compared to a certain LBP2 DLC pack. Yeah, that's right, Sackboy's Prehistoric Moves.
Greetings, people of March 2010. Kevin Butler here, coming to you from the future. That's right, all the way from November 2010. Let me tell you, the future is crazy. We all eat our food through straws, and we're all still reeling from the shocking end of the baseball season. That's right, Kansas City in 6, so call your bookie. And of course, the arrival of the future of gaming, the PlayStation Move, which has been an incredible success, so thank you.
Released in September of 2010, the PlayStation Move controller was Sony's attempt at mimicking Nintendo's success with the Wii. Not only did the controller use the PlayStation Eye for tracking, similar to the Wii's sensor bar, but they even had a Wii nunchuck counterpart with the navigation controller, something I still don't own to this day. It's obvious Sony wanted to appeal to a more casual audience with the Move, even marketing it as this controller that would change everything. They thought it would change everything. It didn't. But to help push the PS Move at launch, Sony made a few commercials featuring fictional Sony CEO Kevin Butler just throwing shade at not only the Wii, but the Xbox Kinect, which I admit was pretty funny.
I mean, come on. Who wants to pretend their hand is a gun? What is this, 3rd grade? Woo, 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 woo.
It sucks to know this man was sued by Sony for appearing in a Nintendo commercial back in the day. I got a PS3 a whole year after the Move released, so I wasn't exactly keeping up with this so-called revolutionary device back in 2010. But after looking through E3 press conferences, articles, and rant videos, it seems to me that there wasn't much hype or fanfare surrounding it. Motion controls during this time started to be seen as more of a fad or a gimmick, and it didn't help that one of the PS Move's biggest downfalls was of course the lack of appealing exclusives. There wasn't a whole lot at launch, and there wasn't a whole lot afterwards either. A lot of games would end up having exclusive PS Move content, but it would usually be smaller scale and often shoehorned in. One of the more intriguing exclusives though, just because of LittleBigPlanet's immense popularity at the time, was Sackboy's Prehistoric Moves, a LittleBigPlanet spin-off announced in a PlayStation blog. From the very beginning, this was meant to be a lower effort side game, specifically made to show off the new Move controller's capabilities. It was released as a digital-only title in December of 2010 at around $6 here in the US. But if you were a PS Plus member and lived in Europe, you actually got Prehistoric Moves for free on December 8th. And for people who bought LittleBigPlanet 2 at launch, they also happened to get the game as a pack-in bonus. Which, remember, LBP2 was releasing in just 1 month. So, how was the game? Well, upon launching the game, you can immediately tell this looks exactly like LittleBigPlanet 1. The loading screens, UI, and even the pod is identical to the first game. And if you were expecting some type of online play or level creator, you're out of luck. Prehistoric Moves strictly focuses on its story mode. a 40-minute adventure consisting of 6 main levels and 4 minigame levels. The main levels are your typical LittleBigPlanet story levels. The standard floaty physics are still intact, and nothing really feels off or deviates from the original game in any way. As for minigame levels, they're your run-of-the-mill score-based challenges like the ones seen in LBP1. The only real difference is, of course, the Move controller functionality. The PS Move is going to be your key to solving puzzles and platforming through each level. If an object has a pink indicator on it, that means you're able to use the PS Move to interact with it. And whether it's pulling at a dinosaur's tongue to open its mouth, or dragging a firefly with your cursor not only to light up a room, but also interact with other objects, I'd say there's plenty of fun ways to use the PlayStation Move here, even if its use is strictly relegated to glowy pink things all around the level. The whole prehistoric dinosaur theme is also unique for sure. I actually did like it a bit, and I'm glad they did cover a new theme in the LBP1 engine one last time. A downside though is that there's no new music, not a single new track. All of it is taken straight from LBP1's story mode. But while no new music is present, there are other brand new assets such as stickers, materials, objects, and new costumes. But all of them are not collectible. Instead, there's a new collectible called the Special Bubble. When all 25 special bubbles are collected, you get a gold trophy, but nothing else. And all of those new costumes, well, they're unlocked from the start. I get that this was marketed as more of a tech demo for PlayStation Move and all, but this would have been a neat last DLC pack for LBP1. Not only does it make a bit more sense as DLC in my opinion, but just like the PSP version of LBP, this game's content was just begging to be brought over to the mainline games. Thankfully, all that stuff was eventually released in a DLC pack called the Prehistoric Assets Pack. The only issue with that is that it was released 5 years later, which at that point meant it was exclusive to LBP3. It's not compatible with older games, even though this stuff was essentially built for the first game, and it's a shame. It's a shame they didn't do it sooner, but I'm sure modders have already solved that issue by now. But like I mentioned earlier, I don't have the navigation controller. The one controller that actually has an analog stick, so unfortunately, I did not play this game the way it was intended. See, if you don't have the navigation controller, they expect you to play with more than one person. You would have somebody control the PlayStation Move while anyone else uses the DualShock 3 to control Sackboy. Since I don't really have friends around or really anybody willing to play some Sackboy's prehistoric moves, I had to use both controllers myself, a DualShock in my left hand and the Move in my right. Yeah, it was extremely uncomfortable, as you might expect, and it made some of the more easier challenges actually challenging. Halfway through, I didn't even know if I was going to beat the game. And on top of that, I just had controller issues in general. The damn thing had trouble calibrating with my PSI camera. Another issue I had was the cursor drifting every now and then, but you could just press the triangle button to recalibrate it, so it's whatever. Overall though, my first experience with Sackboy's prehistoric moves was just fine. I would consider going back to it just to ace all of the levels, collect the special bubbles, and earn all of the trophies, but after that, yeah, I don't know. Compared to actual LittleBigPlanet games, this barely has any replayability, and that's mainly due to the lack of collectibles, the lack of a level creator, and a general lack of content. The level design and puzzles, while fun, were also pretty simple and followed a very similar formula. It's not a bad game, especially for what it is, being a tech demo for PlayStation Move and whatnot, but at $6, is it worth it? Should you buy it today? Well, I would have probably said no, especially if you don't have a navigation controller. But at the time of making this retrospective, Sony announced that the PS3 store is basically getting taken down. If you haven't heard about that yet, I talked all about it in my previous video, but yes, now I would buy it just because it's digital only, and by July of this year, it's going to be gone forever. I can't say I really recommend the PS Move itself, though, because looking back, all this controller really turned out to be was a more accurate Wii remote, with barely any games to justify its purchase. It would never go on to be this outstanding achievement for Sony. It wasn't really anything revolutionary like they said it would be, but for whatever reason, we're still using the Move controller for things like PSVR. Yeah, somehow it lived on past the PS3 and is currently being used for PSVR titles, and those titles can be played on PS5, the current generation. Somehow, the PlayStation Move lived longer than the Vita. Let's think about that. However, this won't last much longer, as Sony has already announced the PS Move's successor quite recently. This new controller is being made for the next generation of PSVR and looks to be a much needed upgrade with an improved button layout, finger detection, adaptive triggers, and more. It's only a matter of time before the Move dies out completely, and I couldn't be more happier, honestly. Not because I hate the idea of motion controls, it's just that this specific controller is old, it's outdated, it needs to go. That's why I can't say the PS Move is a worthwhile purchase in 2021. But if you like LittleBigPlanet, it might still be cool to pick up. I mean, sure, there's Prehistoric moves that I just talked about today, but in LBP2 there was a whole Move Pack DLC, and from what I remember, that was a lot more enjoyable than Prehistoric moves. Just keep in mind that the PlayStation Eye camera is necessary for tracking the PlayStation Move, and a navigation controller is highly recommended once again, because you don't want to be playing the game like I played it. It's not good. All of this stuff is dirt cheap on eBay anyway, so if you really want to pick it up, you can. And I almost forgot to mention this, but they even kind of teased that LBP2 move pack at the end of Prehistoric moves. So yeah, they were building up to that for what, like 8 months? Who knows though, I might talk about that pack one day. I might talk about DLC packs in general one day, but we'll see. Because I don't own all of them, and a few of those packs are already delisted. I don't know how I would even get access to those older packs that I don't have, like the Disney ones and the Nickelodeon ones. The PlayStation Vita, Sony's swan song in the portable gaming market. A market that Nintendo would go on to completely dominate once again, as Sony shifted away from the Vita to focus on the PS4 and PSVR. The Vita was their very last handheld console to date, and it's a shame, because this tiny little failure had potential. It was stronger and had a much higher resolution than the Nintendo 3DS. It had some great first-party games announced in its first year, and even had some promising third-party support as well. But in the end, it just didn't set the world on fire. At least not outside of Japan, where it went absolutely crazy. Sony didn't support the system for much longer though after those first couple of years, and it was up to indies to keep this console alive. And they did, for a while. Nowadays, the Vita isn't remembered for much. Most of its must-have exclusive games like Gravity Rush and even Persona 4 Golden have already been ported to PS4 or PC. However, there is one game that I will always remember the Vita for, as it was one of the main reasons I wanted the system back when it came out in 2012. And that game is LittleBigPlanet Vita.
Welcome to Sackboy's newest adventure, an incredible world that fits into your pocket. Tilt your way across his planet. Defy gravity with your fingertips. Personalize your quest with a snap of the camera. Then swipe Sackboy to victory. Play in amazing new ways with all new LittleBigPlanet, only on PlayStation Vita. The world is in play.
2012 just so happened to be the year that I was heavily invested into the LittleBigPlanet series. I got a PS3 on Christmas of 2011, and I played LBP1 and LBP2 almost religiously for the duration of 2012. So of course I just had to get my hands on this brand new portable entry. I only had to wait until September of that year, and when launch day finally arrived, of course, something came up. Very early in the morning, I remember I had to go into the emergency room for whatever reason. I can't remember why, but I know for a fact that the only thing I was worried about in that hospital bed was going to GameStop later that day and grabbing the one and only game I got my PS Vita for. Thankfully, there was nothing seriously wrong with me, and I was admitted shortly after. I was even able to skip school that day due to my ER visit. So in theory, I was able to play LittleBigPlanet Vita all day long with no distractions whatsoever. And you know what I did that day? After all that anticipation, after all that waiting, I spent the entire time downloading my LBP1 and LBP2 DLC. Because why not? Sony was doing this cross-buy promotion thing at the time with a lot of their PS3 and Vita stuff, and that included LittleBigPlanet DLC. All of those costumes carried over at no extra costs, and I just had to have my Sonic and Ape Escape Monkey costumes. The next morning though, and for pretty much every day after for at least a week, I brought my PS Vita on the bus with me and just played story mode and community levels on my way to school. Because yeah, in this game, you were able to download community levels to play offline. I even remember downloading a first-person Slenderman level and showing it to all of my friends at school that day. It was awesome. But one day, tragically, I traded in my original PS Vita, LittleBigPlanet along with it. Clearly, there just wasn't a whole lot on the system for me to keep it around. Not even LBP was enough to make up for the system's lackluster library. It also didn't help that none of my friends had a Vita. I don't even think they knew what a Vita was, so I couldn't really play with anybody. It wasn't until much later when I got a new Vita, went back, and really played this game again. I finally finished the story mode for the first time not even 2 years ago, and man, for 8 whole years, I had every opportunity to give this game a fair chance, and I just neglected it, never realizing how good of an LBP game this would turn out to be. Not only was it a major step up from the PSP version, but I would argue that LBP Vita feels pretty damn close to its console counterparts, specifically LBP2, as it's seemingly built off of that game. It is hands down one of my favorite LittleBigPlanet games ever. And if I played this game just a bit more as a kid, and didn't trade in my Vita to GameStop for a few extra bucks, I might have been able to remember it more fondly. It didn't add a whole lot of new tools or logic pieces, sure, but it was still a breath of fresh air for the series, and it didn't cut many corners surprisingly enough for being on much weaker hardware. This LittleBigPlanet game was not developed by the original creators of LBP, Media Molecule. Much like how Studio Cambridge handled the PSP game, LBP Vita was primarily developed by 2 different studios, that being Tarsier Studios, which is now known for their work on Little Nightmares, as well as Double 11, who helped make a lot of the Pixel Junk games and even Minecraft Dungeons. Tarsier were the ones behind LBP Vita's level design and art direction, while Double 11 helped a lot with the programming. And in addition to those main developers, this game also had a relatively large amount of supporting devs, that of which included Sumo Digital, who you might know as the studio that would go on to make the next mainline LittleBigPlanet title, LBP3, as well as Sackboy A Big Adventure in 2020. It's really a shame though, as this was the worst selling LittleBigPlanet game, at least outside of LBP Karting, which was an actual spin-off. But yeah, unfortunately, due to the PlayStation Vita's lack of sales in general, LBP Vita suffered as well. Even if it was one of the best-selling games on the system at 1.1 million units, that doesn't change the fact that the system's install base itself was detrimental. Other Vita exclusives like Tearaway, and again, Gravity Rush, one of my personal favorites, had the benefit of getting PS4 ports and/or sequels. They got a second wind of life, while LBP Vita was left to die on the console it was born on, and that sucks, man. I would have loved to see this game on PS3 or PS4 even, but I suppose I understand why it would have been a challenge to port this game. It's not exactly PS3 or PS4 friendly. LBP Vita just relies too much on the PS Vita's unique capabilities, most of which can't be replicated perfectly on a DualShock controller. And while some might have preferred a more traditional control scheme, overall, I do like some of the stuff they did with the Vita hardware, specifically in story mode. Speaking of which, let's get into the story mode, along with some of the other single-player content, because that's where I feel LBP Vita really shines.
We must stop him, or we will soon reach the end of the road! Oh, Gimmicks! The end of the road! Ah!
We saw how the story of LittleBigPlanet games got more fleshed out over time. For example, the LBP1 and LBP PSP story modes, while fun, were pretty basic storytelling-wise. The characters were very simple, the plot was almost non-existent, and the mode itself was sort of treated as just an introduction to the concept of LittleBigPlanet. A mode where people can unlock new tools to help create their own levels. LittleBigPlanet 2 took this a step further, as the story mode in that game was more robust. It had more of a plot going on with the Alliance and the Negativitron. There were actual cutscenes, voice acting, and the characters felt more like living creatures, unlike the LBP1 characters. LBP Vita, I'd say, is the most interesting when it comes to the plots. It's essentially just an extension of LBP2's story mode structure, but in my opinion, it is the best story mode to date, in both actual story and gameplay. LBP Vita's story takes place on a new planet called Carnavalia, a once happy and joyful planet turned sad and gloomy as creatures known as the Hollows run rampant. The Hollows are these creepy-looking, seemingly soulless puppets created by our main antagonist, the Puppeteer. And by the end of the game, it does get surprisingly dark and depressing as we learn who the Puppeteer really is and why the Hollows were even created. In fact, this whole game feels a lot darker in tone compared to other LittleBigPlanet games, and I really dig it. I guess that makes sense though, because, like I said, Tarsier Studios went on to make Little Nightmares after this, and I wouldn't be surprised if their work on LBP Vita influenced aspects of Little Nightmares in some way. Back to the story though. Carnavalia has its own lovable cast of characters to meet throughout the campaign, much like LBP2's Alliance, but unlike characters like Larry da Vinci and Clive Hanforth, who were all based on different types of objects, arts, and crafts, the characters you meet in LBP Vita are all wooden puppets. The same puppets, in fact, that the Puppeteer tossed away after getting booed off stage, which eventually led to his loneliness and motivation for creating the Hollows. And you know, I do appreciate how all of these characters are personally connected to the main antagonist. They're like family to the Puppeteer in a way, and it makes you happy for them when they're eventually reunited at the end. You got characters like Colonel Flounder, once a legendary ringmaster of Carnavalia. And then there's the unbelievable Otis, leader of a group of daredevils called the Unbelievables. There's Mrs. Sunshine, who's just a sad clown. And then there's Marianne, who is just a puppet. Yeah, that's it, just a raggedy old puppet. My absolute favorite though, hands down, is Sean Braun. He's such a cool lad. I also like how most of these characters were designed to be different circus actors in a way. Obviously, some fit that criteria more than others, but overall, I think they fit the theming of Carnavalia very nicely. I will say though, Carnavalia itself isn't completely circus-themed all throughout. Each new world of story mode is actually quite distinct, having vastly different settings from each other, and I really like the amount of variety here. La Marionetta is the first world in story mode, and right away, you do see many of the circus elements you come to expect from a place called Carnavalia. But after that is the overgrown / steampunk area, the Land of Odd. Then there's Jackpot City, which is more of a futuristic type of setting, Coaster Valley, which has amusement park / junkyard vibes, and finally, Spooky Mansion, which kinda speaks for itself. It's a spooky mansion. Shifting over to the gameplay side of things though, as I said earlier, this game likes to take advantage of the Vita's front and back touchscreens in pretty much any way it can. Whether it's grabbing or dragging objects with your finger, flinging or guiding Sackboy through various obstacles, and using the back touchpad to push things from the background into the foreground. It's pretty obvious which objects are meant to be touched, as they're indicated with either a light blue or light green color. Light blue objects are meant to be touched from the front touchscreen, and green objects are meant for the back touchscreen, or touchpad. Oh, and gyroscope is also used quite a bit, usually for just controlling different types of vehicles and contraptions by tilting and turning your Vita. Outside of that, this game is still LittleBigPlanet at its core. It's still the same old floaty physics-based platformer that LBP always was. But that's a good thing. The level design is super solid throughout all 25 plus main story levels. There's plenty of collectibles to look out for, and the game even supported online play for up to 4 people. Now that's something the PSP version of LittleBigPlanet couldn't do. Fan favorite power-ups such as the grappling hook and grabinator from LBP2 also make a return. And in addition to the main campaign, there's also a handful of score-based minigames to spend some time with. But that's not all, as LittleBigPlanet Vita's story also introduced the arcade world. And this world is literally just bigger and more fleshed out minigames with several levels. It even had the ability to save your progress too. There were 5 of these arcade games in total, and Tapling, for example, was this Diet Super Meat Boy type game, where you have to control a little blob guy and jump off walls by tapping the touchscreen. There's also one called Orbit that I kinda liked, where you have to guide a firefly using the rear touchpad and collect stars while avoiding obstacles. None of these were particularly special, to be honest, but I do like that they're here. It's just something different, you know? A little extra side mode that helps LBP Vita stand out just a bit more compared to the console games. These arcade games kinda even remind me of something like, I don't know, Angry Birds or other classic mobile games that were made around this time. I guess that makes sense though, as mobile games really took over the industry during 2011 and 2012. I wouldn't be surprised if capitalizing on that early mobile gaming market was their intention with this. But yeah, story mode, minigames, and the arcade mode are all great reasons to go back and play LittleBigPlanet Vita today in 2022. But what about the other half of this game? What about the create mode and the community levels? Surely those are worth checking out in this LBP entry as well, right? As many of you may already know, LBP Vita's online servers were unfortunately shut down late last year following a DDoS attack on all of the mainline LittleBigPlanet servers. Meaning, you can no longer publish, play, or download any user-generated levels anymore. And those hundreds of thousands of levels that previously existed before no longer exist. They're gone forever as far as I know. You can still make levels, of course, but sharing your creations with other people was kind of the main point of LBP. You could play, create, and share, but without the share, this game is only 2/3 of LittleBigPlanet game. LBP PSP servers were also shut down way back in 2016, but now, alongside PSP, LBP Vita, LBP1, LBP2, and LBP3 servers on PS3 are shut down as well. The only game that remains now is LBP3 on PS4, and who knows when that's gonna shut down at this point. Like, sure, it was only a matter of time before these servers kicked the bucket, but the reason these games shut down at all just kinda sucks. Like, it could have been avoided completely, and we might have had more years to play LBP Vita online. The server closure also means you can no longer play LBP Vita online with other people. The story mode can't be 100% completed due to certain prize bubbles requiring more than one person, and sadly, there is no local co-op either. Online was your only chance to play this game with others. But as for my experience with the community levels in LBP Vita, before the server closure at least, I gotta say, I really didn't spend that much time with them. I remember downloading that Slenderman level and bringing it to school. I remember playing a couple of bomb survivals here and there, but my memory of this game was primarily the story mode. Create mode is another thing I didn't really bother with either, but I'm not much of a creator, so that's not that surprising. What I will say though is that LBP Vita did add a couple of neat tools to create mode this time around. For example, it added the memorizer, and this tool is really a game changer as it literally allows you to save your progress in a community level. You also had the invisible material, which is a solid material that was visible in create mode, but invisible in play mode, so a nice replacement to dark matter there. And of course, you have the touchable materials and touch-based tools alongside them, such as the touch sensor, touch tweaker, and motion recorder. As for the create mode experience, it is a million times better than LBP PSP, let me tell you. Vita's create mode is near identical to LBP2's create mode, minus a few things like, well, every single asset from LBP1 and 2. That's kind of a big deal. Also, the Paint Nader is absent for some reason, not too sure why that's not here. But outside of that huge chunk of content, this really is as close as you can get to the full package when it comes to create tools and logic pieces. No cut corners, no awkward controls. This is create mode. The only drawback though, if you couldn't guess, is the lack of variety for materials, objects, themes, and stickers. There's really not a lot to work with there, and it's upsetting that the console stuff never carried over. But that was LittleBigPlanet Vita. Even though I didn't spend much time creating levels or even playing other people's levels, this game had probably the strongest story mode in the entire series. It was also the most unique entry in my opinion. It didn't strip much away like LBP PSP did to LBP1's features either. This was a full-on LittleBigPlanet game on the go, and if there's anything the PS Vita should be remembered for, it should be LittleBigPlanet.
Suddenly it doesn't feel so safe out there.
people are looking at you with bad intentions. Because with Vita, your spot on the leaderboard is always up for grabs. Find a friend, find an enemy, find a game. Anywhere, anytime. Never stop playing. PlayStation Vita.
As for future LittleBigPlanet retrospectives, there is technically one more game I have left to talk about. Yeah, so, about that. I've teased this video more times than I can count, but I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready to tackle the final LittleBigPlanet game in this retrospective series, LittleBigPlanet Karting, a PS3 game that came out at the tail end of the console's life cycle. And looking back, that was a pretty wild era, man. It's almost like Sony was pushing out as many games as possible before the PS4 hit store shelves. From 2012 to 2013, we were getting game after game. There was a new Twisted Metal, Sly Cooper 4, the first Last of Us game, and who could forget PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, a game I can probably ramble on about for hours on end, but I'll save that for another time. LittleBigPlanet was also quickly becoming one of Sony's most consistently active franchises, with just how many games were being pumped out each year. I mean, look at the release schedule. LBP2 came out in 2011, LBP Vita in 2012, and not even 2 months after that, LittleBigPlanet Karting released in November of that year. An LBP kart racing spin-off that certainly seemed like a knockout success on paper, especially with how much recognition and praise the mainline series was getting at the time. But success is not the word I would use to describe LBP Karting. From low sales to mixed reviews, Karting was kind of a letdown for both fans and PlayStation alike. Even still, I'll always have a soft spot for this game. I wouldn't call myself Karting's #1 defender though. It does have its problems, but I don't think it's a bad game. It had some serious potential to be something bigger than what it was, but sadly it just never really took off. Before I delve a bit deeper into this LBP spin-off, we have to acknowledge its predecessor, because without it, an LBP kart racer might not have existed in the first place.
Dear PlayStation, I'm going against Steve on this Mod Nation Racers track I made. He's pretty good. Man up, Twitchy. This is your house. You created this track, made these shortcuts. The whole PlayStation Network's scared of your squish block things. Yeah. This track's a part of you, like an undersized jockstrap. Yeah. Some Steve's gonna defile it like a junkyard sofa. Wrong. Wrong is so right, it's wrong, right? I think so. No, you know so.
Mod Nation Racers, rated E for everyone.
Enter Mod Nation Racers, a kart racer released for both the PS3 and PSP in May of 2010. It was developed by the Canadian studio United Front Games, alongside Sony's own San Diego studio. San Diego studio was already an established developer, primarily known for their work on NBA games and MLB The Show. United Front Games, on the other hand, didn't have a single game under their belt yet, meaning that Mod Nation Racers was their first official release as a studio. And while it didn't break any records, the game's reception was fairly positive when it came out. Sure, there were numerous comparisons to Mario Kart, but what really made this game stand out was its focus on user-generated content. It was still a kart racer at its core, with power-ups and goofy little characters you could drive as, but you could also create and share your own custom avatars, karts, and most importantly, racetracks. If anything, it was a lot more like LittleBigPlanet, and I think it's safe to say that LBP was definitely a direct inspiration for it. Sony practically marketed both games together, with Mod Nation being labeled as the next game in the Create, Play, and Share series, a tagline that was only really associated with the LBP series. The developers at United Front also seemingly had a good relationship with Media Molecule, to the point where a Sackboy skin and Kart was bundled with launch copies of Mod Nation Racers. They did a couple of things outside of Mod Nation though. UFG would later go on to make Sleeping Dogs in 2012 while acting as a support studio on titles such as Tomb Raider, Halo the Master Chief Collection, and Disney Infinity. After failing to find much financial success though, the studio would close down in late 2016, causing them to cancel all of their upcoming projects. But just a few years before their closure, UFG did manage to put out one last game. LittleBigPlanet Karting released on November 6th, 2012, and it was the last game primarily developed by United Front Games. Leading up to its release, I remember being extremely excited for it. I mean, LittleBigPlanet took over my entire life around this time, so when you tell me that there's going to be an LBP kart racer where I can make and play endless amounts of custom tracks, I was sold. I needed this game day one. I remember rewatching the trailers on YouTube and IGN's website, patiently waiting for the game's release. I even ended up securing a code to participate in the game's private beta by signing up to a mailing list. That's also how I ended up getting my LBP beta vest, which, as a kid, was arguably just as exciting as the game for me. But before karting came to be, UFG was planning to develop a console sequel to the first ModNation Racers game. However, something fell through behind the scenes, and ModNation 2 got turned into an LBP kart racer. So if you ever thought that these games felt similar to each other, it's because karting is technically a sequel to ModNation in disguise. A lot of assets and mechanics that were being worked on for ModNation 2 can even be seen in early builds of LBPK. In comparison to ModNation though, LBPK was a much slower paced game and doesn't carry over some of ModNation's mechanics, such as the boost meter. On the bright side, LBPK had a much more robust track editor, allowing you to make much more than just race tracks and battle tracks, essentially being a platform for games much like how LBP2 was advertised. In karting, you can make shoot-'em-up styled boss fights, top-down RC car levels, race tracks in a 2D or first-person perspective, and so much more. For being an LBP spin-off with very little input from Media Molecule, I feel like UFG and San Diego Studio really nailed that quintessential LBP charm, which kinda seems to be a trend for these LBP side games. The pod, customization, and most importantly, music are all totally on point for this series. The new original songs are pretty good, but the licensed tracks are where they really cooked. Tracks like 10 Cities Beyond, Fresh, Happy Birthday Party, and of course, the remix of Airbrushed from Anamanaguchi are near the top for me when it comes to LBP music. They even added another song from Kinky, who featured in LBP1 with the iconic Canyon song Corn Man. The game's graphics also looked pretty decent for a PS3 game. I know it's probably just the lighting engine doing most of the heavy lifting, but I don't care. 12 years later, and I'm still impressed at how good this game looks sometimes. Another notable feature with LBP Karting is that it carried over all of the DLC costumes you purchased from LBP1 and LBP2. The only DLC that wasn't cross-buy was obviously the level packs.
Earlier today, a race broke out between 4 crazy karts. Reports suggest no dinosaurs have been harmed, although we can confirm a donut did sustain some damage. All drivers are thought to be armed and slightly ridiculous. Gamers at home are being advised to customize their karts, drive any track, and race the unexpected with LittleBigPlanet Karting, only for PlayStation 3.
The gameplay in LBPK is pretty simple and easy to understand. The moment you boot up the game, you're greeted with a tutorial that teaches you the basics and presents you with 2 different control options. You can choose to accelerate with the X button or the R2 trigger. If you choose X, you can drift with the R1 bumper, and if you choose R2, you can drift with the X button. Drifting, much like most kart racers, gives you an extra boost depending on how long you hold it. And also like other kart racers, LBPK features items you can pick up to add a bit of randomness to each race. The items in this game come in the form of the Weaponator, a weapon pickup that grants the player a random attack or defense item, most of which are direct references to the mainline LBP games. I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but some of the weapons you can get include the Paintinator, which stuns enemy players when hit, the Boxing Glove, which is essentially this game's bullet bill, and the somewhat busted Fast Forward item that straight up teleports you to where most of the players are. There's also a variety of different missiles and mines you can get as well. The coolest part about the Weaponator though is the fact that you can customize the way these items look when creating your own levels. When I played this game as a kid, I remember people used to recreate a lot of Mario Kart items, such as the red and green shells, banana peels, and even the item boxes themselves. And if you couldn't guess, pretty much everything about this game was customizable. Not just the tracks or the Weaponator, but your Sackboy, your pod, and even the karts can all be customized to your liking, albeit with some limitations. Your Sackboy can be customized the same way you can in any other mainline LBP games. There's loads of different costume pieces and stickers you can unlock throughout the game, game, and as I mentioned earlier, the DLC you purchase from LBP are all carried over here. One of the only real downsides for Sackboy customization is the fact that stickering in LBP Karting is pretty terrible. Compared to the actual LBP games, it's really hard to place stickers exactly where you want them. When it comes to the kart customization in LBPK, none of it actually affects gameplay, as all karts and wheels have the same exact stats to one another. Even if they look drastically different, it's all the same. This is where I can see people being let down a lot, because not having any stats to wheels and karts kinda negates a lot of strategizing, but at the same time, who knows if United Front Games would have implemented balance changes to prevent the most dominant kart builds from winning every race. I know that was an issue in Mario Kart 8 for a while, where every single person online was using Waluigi on the Wiggler. At the end of the day, they went for the more casual approach, and the only real strategizing in this game mainly comes from how you utilize your items and drift boosts. That being said, there are a few more gameplay mechanics I haven't touched on just yet. Those would be the grappling hook, stunts, and of course slapping, because you can't have an LBP game without slapping. The grappling hook from LBP2 Returns is a very small mechanic in certain parts of a course. Some racetracks will have sections where you'll be prompted to use your grappling hook to latch onto grabbable sponges. This is karting's way of implementing a sort of platforming element, and it can be used as a way to access shortcuts within certain racetracks. Stunts are another mechanic in this game and are probably going to be your best bet in pulling ahead in certain courses. Stunts can be performed only when your kart is in the air. By using the right stick, you can spin your car around, and depending on how many 360-degree rotations you do, the greater the boost you get when landing back down. You can also use stunts in tandem with the grappling hook after using it, or after using a boost ramp. You just gotta make sure you're facing the right direction when you land, because one bad stunt can cost you the whole race. But last but not least is the slap mechanic. If you're neck to neck with another player, simply flick the right stick to slap them and cause them to slow down for a brief period. That pretty much covers how the game plays. Now, how does the game feel? Well, as I said before, karting always felt a bit slower compared to ModNation Racers, and I was never a big fan of that. But it's not only just slower, the racing in this game also felt floatier, much like the actual LBP games. ModNation was a much more responsive and tight controlling racing game, and I feel like LittleBigPlanet Karting did not need to be as floaty as it is. I don't know if they were trying to replicate the feel of LBP, but I don't know. Giving this game ModNation's tight controls could have honestly benefited this game a lot, and I know they were trying to make the games feel different, but that's one thing karting should have definitely taken from ModNation, if anything. It also doesn't help that karting is a game that targets 30 FPS, which isn't really the best when it comes to racing games. I know some people aren't as sensitive to lower FPS in games, but if you play any other kart racer that runs at a stable 60 and go back to LBPK, it's a night and day difference. I know it's never going to happen, but karting is a game I would love to see get a modern remaster. Not just for the FPS increase, but maybe to tighten up the controls a little bit too.
The kart is running great, kid, and Tony and Level Creations got something special for you, Tone. One of these! Okay! Fix the karts, you drive the karts, and people like Tony and the online community can use the Level Creator to dream up, create, and share new tracks every day. Straight out of their heads and into your tank.
Fueled by imagination.
Go get 'em, kid.
The main appeal of LBP Karting, much like ModNation, was naturally the online aspect. Sharing your own custom tracks and playing the limitless amounts of community-made courses was the main appeal of these games. Damn it! Okay, fine, look, the servers might have shut down for karting in ModNation years ago, but that's not going to stop me, because I've actually had the opportunity to play LBP Karting online for the past year or so. I've been able to playtest an upcoming custom server for the game alongside some other people. The server is primarily being developed for ModNation Racers first and foremost, but since karting and ModNation are essentially the same game, this server just kinda works for both of them. But for the purpose of this video, I'm only going to focus on talking about my karting experience. I also want to make it clear that I only know the person who's making the server itself. I have no affiliation with the group that will be hosting it. In fact, I don't even know who's going to be hosting it. I just know that this server is being made to be eventually hosted by a group of people. But whenever it does go public, I'll be sure to make a follow-up video, maybe just playing some courses with friends on both games. With this being an unfinished private server purely for testing purposes, there are still issues that need to be ironed out. That means my experience with Karting's Online isn't going to be 100% accurate to how it was back in the day. Don't get me wrong though, it's pretty damn close. Since the official LBPK servers were properly archived, we were able to play on a ton of custom tracks, and I gotta say, there were some decent tracks here, some that I've never really played before. I always thought LBPK had a weak lineup of custom tracks to play because the cool pages back then never properly updated to show new and trending levels. The cool pages were just broken, I guess. There ended up being a lot of courses here you would expect, such as Mario Kart and Crash Team Racing recreations, and those are always fun, but there were plenty of original tracks as well. Some of my favorites were actually some of the battle tracks, because battle tracks are where people took the opportunity to change up the gameplay. For example, there's this one level called LB Park, and the entire track is just you driving around a functional amusement park. You can ride bumper cars, Ferris wheels, and even roller coasters. It's really neat, and it's a fun little hangout course to play with friends. It's actually a level I remember playing when the game first came out, so it was nice to actually experience it again. Another battle track I liked a lot was this one where you battled underwater using custom submarines. And yeah, I almost forgot to mention, LBPK lets you make custom level specific vehicles for people to drive, and somehow people found a way to make a submarine battle map with that. I uploaded about 75 archived tracks onto the server, and we played through quite a bit of them. Not all of them were super high quality, but every now and then we'd play in something insane, like a Star Wars pod racing track, or this cool South Park track with a custom Kenny power-up. Some of the people I tested with also made their own original tracks to play on. And when I was scrolling through the cool pages, seeing all these new levels I never played before, it really felt like I was playing LBP Karting online with an active community again. That isn't to say that my experience was entirely perfect. There's a few issues I ran into with these custom servers that might get fixed in the future, but I'm not really sure. One of the biggest issues is the fact that joining other people's pods is completely broken. So the only way I was able to play with other people is if I loaded up a track and had people join me through the quick play option. I did play on both actual PS3 hardware and on PC through the RPCS3 emulator. And from my experience, playing on the PS3 was a lot better than playing on PC. Depending on how much was going on in the tracks, I experienced some significant frame drops on emulator. From what I understand, it's an RPCS3 issue. Hopefully the game gets more stability updates on RPCS3 because at this current moment, I'm probably just going to stick with official hardware. Speaking of which, players on RPCS3 and PS3 can actually cross-play with each other, so if you have friends on PS3 that don't want to play an emulator, you can still play with them even if you're on PC. I would be more than happy to continue talking about my experience with karting online, but I think I'll wait until the server is actually finished and released before I do so. But for now, let's move on to the actual creation aspect of karting.
I remember calling some friends of mine and saying, dude, I just got this game. This is crazy. You cannot believe what you can actually do with this. They actually made the game and they gave you the tools that they used to make the game and you can do it yourself. And from there, just completely hooked. It has to be the best game that I've ever played.
Now, if you know anything about me, you'd know that I'm not much of a creator in these UGC games. I made some levels in LBP, but a majority of my time was spent playing other people's creations, not making them. As for LBPK's create mode, I don't think I spent more than 5 minutes making something in this game. So, I'm just gonna bring in someone who's more familiar with LBP Karting's track editor. If you watched my LBP refresh videos, you should recognize his voice.
Hey guys, it's me, John Furlow, and I'm not gonna lie, don't tell Victini I said this, but I'm not very good at creating an LBP at all. I kind of lied about that to get in this video, because I just love LittleBigPlanet Karting. It's actually my favorite kart racer ever in the history of mankind, and apart from the looks, it's very different from any LBP game, and the create mode is very different as well. Unlike other LBP games, the create mode is actually a full 3D space, and it's the closest thing we have to a fully 3D LittleBigPlanet create mode. It also takes a lot from the Mod Nation Racers create mode, which makes sense since this game was supposed to be Mod Nation Racers 2, and to be honest, a lot of it is just Mod Nation create mode presented with the LBP HUD, but that's not to say it didn't have its own unique LBP things aside from the HUD. The create mode had different backgrounds like the other LBP games. It had LBP tools and objects. It had some logic. You could customize the power-ups and the little boxes the power-ups came in. You could customize the entire HUD, and you can even create custom little carts. Like this level had you in a boat, but there were limitations. There was no co-op creation, so unlike the other LBP games, you couldn't bring your friends into create mode. You couldn't make your own music like in LBP2. You had to use the music the prize bubbles gave you. Overall, even though if it is a full 3D space, it doesn't necessarily mean it's better than the normal LBP create mode. And don't get me wrong, this create mode is very different and it's really cool, but compared to the other create modes, you can't really do a whole lot in this one. At least from what I've seen, this create mode is not groundbreaking at all. But compared to Mod Nation Racers, there's more stuff you can do. Like in Mod Nation Racers, you can't really make a whole Mario Kart track with Mario Kart items. I feel like in comparison to Mod Nation's create mode, it's kind of an upgrade. It's kind of an upgrade. Like, there is some stuff missing. There was a feature in Mod Nation where you can get the game to populate the track for you, like add trees and decorations and all that. That feature just isn't in this game. There were specific kind of traps and hazards in Mod Nation, which were switched out for more LBP styled hazards and traps. So it's kind of whatever you prefer on that one. So it is just weird to me, because the LBP Karting create mode, even with it being a full 3D space to create, it feels more limited compared to the other LBP games. Even if you have a bigger space to work with, it is just an odd addition. They could have gone the Saba route and just not made a create mode, but they did it anyway, even if it is just a reskin of Mod Nation Racers create mode. It's still a really cool thing, and literally nobody talks about it. Like hell, Victini didn't even want to talk about it, dude. He got me to do it. But it is still really cool, and nobody talks about it, and it doesn't help that nobody even talks about this game. But I think I am done rambling. I think I said what needs to be said. Thank you for letting me on, Victini, and back to you.
One last aspect of LBP Karting that I haven't gone over yet is the game's story mode. The plot this time around involves a new group of antagonists called the Horde. A group of greedy hoarders that have been stealing stuff from all over Craft World. It's up to Sackboy and his newly acquired Kart to stop the Horde and bring everything back to its rightful place. The campaign consists of about 25 different racetracks, but that's not the only content here, as the mode also features a variety of side levels, including battle arenas, mini-games, and even boss fights. All tracks are spread across 7 distinct worlds, and there's a mix of both brand new locations and even old locations from past LBP games. The very first world in story mode is quite literally called LittleBigPlanet, and includes courses based on the gardens, wedding, and canyons themes from LBP 1. Victoria's Laboratory and Eve's Asylum also make a return from LBP2 as full-blown worlds. And the brand new worlds are Monster Islands, Progress Emporium, and the Space Base. These 3 might seem entirely new at first glance, but they do seem to link back to past LBP games as well. Monster Islands has a Japanese Zen garden aesthetic, much like the Islands theme from LBP 1. Progress Emporium, the retro futurism theme, almost perfectly mirrors Factory of a Better Tomorrow in a lot of ways. And Space Base, a nightclub spaceship, is canonically located right above Avalonia. Outside of those 6, there is technically one more world, but I'll get into that a bit later, as I want to briefly go over this game's story characters. Each world has their own creator-curator, and unlike how LBP2 had walking, talking sackbots as its story characters, United Front Games decided to bring back the classic cardboard cutout character type from LBP1 and PSP. That means curators that were previously sackbots, such as Victoria and Eve, aren't present for their own story worlds. This time around, Victoria's lab has Vernon the Lab Rat, and Eve's Asylum features a character named Venus the Flytrap. But hey, at least the LittleBigPlanet themed world brought back the Queen, along with cameos of other LBP1 characters. The brand new curators I haven't mentioned yet include Ray the Wonder Turtle from Monster Islands, Don Doubtworthy from Progress Emporium, and Captain Sirius Oculus from the Space Base. And I know this is going to be a bit controversial to some, but I don't really care much for most of these characters, especially compared to the Alliance in LBP2. I think some of them are neat, like Don Doubtworthy, who's this sketchy but otherwise friendly businessman, or Sirius Oculus, this funky space captain that also happens to be good friends with Avalon Centrifuge. Everyone else though, like Vernon, Venus, and Ray, all seem to be pretty forgettable to me. That's not too big of a deal though, as the characters are not the main focus here. It's how good the racetracks play and how interesting the themes are. And just about every racetrack in this game is fun to play on. They're all pretty well designed and do their job to showcase what players can achieve using the game's level editor. And at the end of the day, that's pretty much what all LittleBigPlanet stories are meant to do. But going back to the last world I didn't talk about, Horde Sweet Horde is the final story world, and it only contains a single level. A boss fight level where you face off against LBPK's true main antagonist, the Trash Monster. The Trash Monster's creation is a direct consequence of the Horde's greed, and it's made up of all of the items that they stole throughout the game. The fight itself has two different phases, with the first having you battle a bunch of trash minions by using the Weaponator. The second and last phase is a bit more involved. You have to focus on avoiding the monster's searchlights, while also shooting lob bombs at his 3 weak point thrusters. If you end up getting caught by one of the searchlights, he'll start shooting homing missiles at you, which is almost a guaranteed death. The game is pretty generous though, giving you a total of 8 lives for some extra insurance. After beating the boss, the trash monster explodes, restoring all of the stolen items back to where they came from. The Horde end up realizing what they did was wrong, and Stephen Fry gives one last touching speech.
Has our Sack heroes' defiance made the Horde realize that to take without giving is a hollow pursuit? That to create and share, the very ethos of LittleBigPlanet, is cast in wool and is exactly how one should live a worthy life. So clean out your clutter, you reformed hoarders. Rebuild your craft world in whatever way you see fit. Let imagination be your stallion, and its eclectic clip-clopping leave trails of wonderment in its wake. Not that you could fit a horse in a cart that size. It was a metaphor. I just meant to be imaginative. Do not try and stuff a horse in that cart. I'm serious. Remember the dog in the envelope incident? Learn from that. Yeah.
Believe it or not, I never actually beat this campaign when I was younger. It wasn't until 2021 where I decided to livestream myself going back to beat karting for the first time. Something I wanted to do to help prepare for this very video. A video I would end up making in 2025. There's not much else I could really go over when it comes to LBP karting. I know there were some DLC karts for the game, but nothing crazy like a track expansion pack. It did have the cross-buy stuff with LBP 1 and 2, but that was really it. When karting released, I always had a feeling that the game wouldn't last very long. The cool pages were broken day 1, there were barely any players in the first couple of months, and UFG didn't do any meaningful updates. The studio would shut down in 2016, and 2 years later, the online servers for both karting and ModNation Racers would shut down as well. I do find it ironic that LittleBigPlanet paved the way for ModNation to exist, while ModNation created LBP Karting, and Karting brought an end to both the studio that made it and the series that preceded it. I'm not sure if there's much of a future for either of these games, considering the main developer is gone, but we'll at least have custom servers to look forward to in the near future. Despite its obvious flaws, I always saw karting as a pretty cool LBP spin-off. ModNation is probably the better racing game, but I can still appreciate them both for different reasons. This might be my final LittleBigPlanet retrospective, but it's definitely not the end for this channel. I have so many more videos I've been wanting to make, and now that I've covered the LBP series in its entirety, I feel more motivated to do whatever I want now. That isn't to say that LittleBigPlanet-centric content isn't going away, because while I might be doing other things, there's still LBP videos I've been wanting to make for a while. I know the series is effectively dead and all, but it was the main focus of this channel for years. I'm not just gonna drop it. As for my next video, I might take a closer look at the ModNation Racer series. Let me know what you think about that in the comments. I don't think it's going to be a super lengthy retrospective like this video, but I'll figure something out. Before I end things off, I just want to say thank you for 50,000 subscribers. Seriously. I never expected to get this far, but here we are, halfway to 100k, which is my absolute dream goal on YouTube. I don't know if we'll hit it anytime soon, if ever, but at this rate, who knows. But I poured way more time into this karting video, more than I have on any other LBP retrospective on the channel. So if you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you leave a like, and subscribe if you haven't, it would mean a lot. Thanks for watching though, I'll see you guys next time.
More videos coming soon.